As much as people love to tout video games as a work of art and a labour of love, the sole reason for a lot of titles existing is purely to make money. So the worst possible thing you could do as a company is to tell people not to buy the bloomin' things. But over the intervening decades, a surprising number of key figures have actually done such a thing, be it out of a bruised ego, sheer arrogance, or in one example in today's video, just to troll the hell out of us. So this episode, we take a look at these rebuffed rivalries, these discredited dissipations, and these contradicted clambakes. As I say, but hello you. I'm Guru Larry, and I welcome you to Fact Hunt. 5 developers who didn't want you to buy their game. Long-term viewers of mine may remember me dedicating an early Games Yanks Can't Wait video to this game, but I had to include it just for the title alone. Back in the 80s, you could make AAA games in the comfort of your own bedroom, and if you felt it was good enough, submit it to a publisher. 9 times out of 10 they ignored you or just gave a polite, "we'll keep you on file" decline letter, but some were lucky enough to make an entire career out of it. Such as this guy. Yeah. But then you had publishers like Firebird, who thought it would be funny to publish several of the worst submissions they ever received into a compilation and release it under the title, "Don't Buy This, 5 of the Worst Games Ever." In truth, most were knockoffs of popular arcade games, and one was even a sequel to a previously submitted game on the list. Aside from the tear-jerkingly beautiful Fido and its even better sequel, Fido 2, the tape featured 3 other gems: Race Ace, Fruit Machine, and Weasel Willy. And yep, all of which are as generic as they sound. To keep things a little fair, Firebird did make the games anonymous, choosing not to reveal the names of who actually coded them, so they didn't accidentally sully the blooming games industry career that the people who made these games go on to achieve. Which, spoiler alert, none of them ever did. But the whole marketing for Don't Buy This, as obvious as it is for inclusion here, went even further than just the title. The folks at Firebird actively encouraged people to copy the game rather than buy it off the shelves. Although surely someone's got to fly in the face of Firebird and actually buy the game in order to then copy it for everyone they know. They even went ahead and released the game on April 1st. The magazines and just about everyone else thought the whole thing was an elaborate April Fool's joke, only to then be shocked when the game was right there on the shelves, selling for £2.50. And amazingly, a lot of people didn't take Firebird's advice. Shockingly, Don't Buy This sold in pretty large numbers. The whole weirdness of the compilation and sheer curiosity that people had over the contents within meant that Don't Buy This became a surprise hit. It wasn't something that Firebird could have done again, and indeed the game wouldn't ever have a sequel. But still, they got more of this blatantly hideous quintet of basic balls up than they could have ever hoped for. So clearly, the lesson learned here is, whenever someone from a company tells you not to buy their game, you should just go ahead and do the opposite. Meaning, you know, buy it. Obviously. No! 2018's Battlefield 5 is a bit of a black eye for EA, mostly for all the flack it received by including predatory loot boxes in the game initially. But before the game was even released, a trailer for the game was causing heat with some of the community, who were perturbed that the inclusion of cyborg females battling on the front line wasn't an entirely accurate portrayal of the Second World War. Especially after the previous Battlefield managed to encapsulate World War I perfectly with its massive Zeppelin flying fortresses. And the ability to repair a horse. In all fairness, Battlefield has never tried too hard to be a wholly accurate and realistic depiction of historical or current war. Every Battlefield is like a Jive Bunny megamix of a famous war's greatest hits. Also, in fairness, the series hasn't exactly covered itself in glory lately. Battlefield 5 wasn't much more than a disappointing reskin of Battlefield 1. But the sight of a British woman wielding a prosthetic arm about in the trailer, that was enough for all hell to break loose. Suddenly, everyone with a Twitter account painting their face up Arnie in Commando style and getting ready for a big online throwdown. Within minutes, the hashtag #NotMyBattlefield started trending on Twitter, filled with various raging about forced diversity, or how DICE was apparently filled with gender-fluid mouth breathers shitting out revisionist SJW games, and so on. Either the focus was on the woman being, well, a woman, or on her apparent cyborg left arm, and the responses from the other side were equally salty and vicious, resulting in a whole mess of sexual swear words. There were some more reasonable comments based around the cyborg arm actually being a World War II era prosthetic given to wounded soldiers, or actually concerns about the ham-fisted nature of the implementation of just about anything in Battlefield, or just the main issue of the game being a bog-average shooter primarily after every penny in your coin purse. Well, all of those more pragmatic pointers kinda got drowned out. In May 2018, it got to the stage where one EA employee, DICE's former CEO Patrick Soderlund, flat out said, either accept it or don't buy the game, further whipping the howling masses into a frenzy. He mentioned that his daughter had said she could play as a girl in Fortnite and wondered why she couldn't in Battlefield. No doubt the simple mention of the F word drove the internet even further into a snarling mess. In the end, well, a lot of people didn't buy Battlefield 5. Was it because they were angry and Patrick Soderlund had told them not to? Probably not in most cases. I mean, releasing a game the same time as Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 didn't exactly help the situation. But the man himself decided to leave EA a couple of months later, and the prosthetic arm that had been the cause of such a frenzy didn't even appear in the final game. Some folk wondered naively on places like Reddit just where the arm had got to, because it looked kinda cool. And you could probably make an hour-long video simply reciting the multi-paragraph responses they got for asking. Randy Pitchford. When you think of someone in the industry who has constantly stayed professional and has never once been a burning centre of controversy, good old Randy is the first name that pops into my head. He's never had anything ridiculous or idiotic to say in his entire life. Oh, hang on, wait. I was thinking of my local chippy owner, who also happens to be named Randy Pitchford. Randy Pitchford, the CEO of Gearbox, on the other hand, well, he's a bloody idiot who has a long history of sticking his mouth and his other body parts into places where they really don't belong. Anyway, why is Pitchford here? What's he gone done this time? Well, this little controversy centres around Borderlands, Gearbox's trilogy of very successful shooter games, filled with banter and memes. For years, most people were perfectly happy with these titles, and all was right in the game's strange post-apocalyptic universe. And with its status as one of the few Gearbox games people mostly tended to enjoy. But then, in 2019, came the decision that the long-awaited Borderlands 3 would be a timed exclusive on the Epic Games Store. Cue horror. The big fight between Epic and Steam for online game store supremacy, reminiscent in many ways of Aliens vs Predator in whoever wins, we lose, was always guaranteed to produce bouts of furious anger whenever someone announced they were shifting away from Valve's omnipresent storefront. But in the case of Borderlands, the reaction was different. While Steam fans couldn't show their disapproval of Borderlands 3 directly, seeing as it obviously didn't have a store page, they instead decided to review bomb previous entries in the Borderlands franchise, specifically the still quite popular Borderlands 2. Even people who played the game for hundreds of hours on Steam were now writing multiple page negative reviews about the game that weirdly was centred around the decision made by a wholly separate entry in the series, which, as we all know, is exactly what reviews are intended for. Now, the best thing to do in this situation would have probably been to ignore the keyboard warriors. But being a keyboard warrior himself, Randy, well, he couldn't do that. Oh no. Inspired by some naturally frustrated tweets from other Gearbox staffers, the man said that the frothing rage made him happier about publisher 2K's decision to make the game a timed Epic exclusive, and that, in the future, he may choose to not release any Gearbox games on Steam at all. Surprisingly, all this was enough to tell a whole platform that they could go and do one. He also accused Steam of doing nothing about it, even though they actually were trying to get rid of the unrelated reviews as quickly as they could. It's just that, you know, internet folk are nothing if not persistent. The storm in a teacup soon died down, naturally. Borderlands 3 ultimately did make it onto Steam in early 2020, and people moved on. Most probably to whatever the next stupid thing Randy said or did was. You're never going to have to wait too long for that to happen, after all. We do love the odd bit of current affairs here on Fact Hunt. It's not all incredibly obscure and unimportant truths about long-forgotten 40-year-old Atari games. So here then is another case of the flames getting so hot around a game that someone has flat out said, if you don't like it, well, don't buy it. It may not exactly seem the best thing to do to sell a game, well, unless you're Firebird, but that's how heated arguments can get on this internet of ours. Naughty Dog's The Last of Us 2, for most of its development, seemed like it should be an easy enough sell. It's a sequel to probably the best loved game on the PS3 after all. Most of the same people were working on it, with the project's lead, Neil Druckmann, at the head, same as he'd been for the original, and for Uncharted 4. So, as an old Bobcat was often known to say, what could possibly go wrong? But go wrong things did. Obviously, otherwise we wouldn't be here. Everything exploded in April 2020 when a whole load of details about the game's plot were leaked onto the internet for all to see. Without spoiling too much for anyone who's not played the game in the hopes it may come out on the Jaguar someday, people were unhappy about various things. The treatment of a particular couple that the original game was based around on, that you then had to play as someone the fans already hated, and that the female characters in the game were, well, rather plain looking. Because, as we all know, there's no better time to get breast augmentations and follow makeup tutorials than the zombie apocalypse. Druckmann, as project's lead, found his inbox thoroughly filled with angry missives from the depths of the superhighway. Once again, the best thing to do may have been to ignore it, at least as much as possible, considering how big the story of the leak was. But, of course, that didn't happen. He posted an Instagram story featuring a famous angry quote from Nirvana's very own Kurt Cobain. Obviously, all this made the rage 10 times worse. Many angry YouTube videos were posted accusing Druckmann of calling everyone who didn't like the leaks a bunch of bigots. Many slap fights occurred on social media platforms, and many company man-hours were wasted composing multi-page diatribes on either side of this mess. The whole thing made this rather unfortunate leak into an even bigger story than it was, and even saw Laura Bailey, one of the game's voice actresses, get tons of harassment just for voicing a character people didn't like. If only those trolls were not fed, then, well, this would probably have happened anyway, to be honest. It is the internet after all. Sometimes a game's success simply can't be explained. It just happens. A mysterious and barely understood algorithm smiles upon you and launches you up into the stratosphere. Even if you don't believe in magic, think about how many gigabytes of apps and games are released now, every single minute. And somehow, out of this constantly flowing river of data, a quickly made, ultra-cheap and kinda derivative Vietnamese game called Flappy Bird gets plucked out of the iOS App Store in 2014 and becomes a phenomenon. It defies explanation. For a time, everyone was playing this stupidly simple yet addictive game. You tap the screen to flap the bird's wings, and you make sure he doesn't hit the pipes coming out of both ends of the screen. You know, the ones that look more than a bit like Mario's pipes that have just been on a crash diet. The development was almost as quick as the game. Dong Nguyen, the retro-influenced creator, spent just 2 days building Flappy Bird, using a sprite from a platformer he abandoned. It sat on the pages of the store, virtually unloved, for months, until in January 2014, he got a video made about it by a certain Swedish YouTuber, whom quite a few people are subscribed to. Flappy Bird exploded, even going beyond the internet. It was talked about in mainstream media even. These 2 words, Flappy Bird, were one of the most searched terms on the whole of Google through 2014. The simple nature of the game meant it took mere days before a whole load of similar games to Flappy Bird popped up on app stores elsewhere, while others criticised the simple gameplay and the game not being wholly original itself. Specifically, they accused it of being a clone of a 2011 mobile game called Pyo Pyo vs Cactus, let alone, you know, both games leaning heavily on famous retro game icons from the beginning. People can respond to sudden success in many different ways, rather than just being chuffed about it. And for Dong Nguyen, well, it just got a little bit too much for him. On February 10th, 2014, just a fortnight or so into the Flappy Bird phenomenon, he suddenly pulled the game entirely from all mobile app stores. He said that he felt guilty about how addictive the game was for people, and that it was just being played too much. And so, he decided to bin it. In the ensuing panic, Flappy Bird addicts actually bought mobile phones that had Flappy Bird pre-installed on them off eBay for quite literally thousands of pounds, even though the game was just a simple little free app. Madness! The game ultimately resurfaced in some sort of official manner. Owners of the Amazon Fire TV were able to play Flappy Bird Family, an official sequel of sorts, later in the year. Of course, by this time, there had been about 1 million direct copies of Flappy Bird all over the place, so it's not like you were short on options. There was even an arcade game, believe it or not. What a crazy little thing this was. I mean, it's just mind-numbingly tapping a screen, for heaven's sake. What's the matter with the world today? Well, sod this. I'm off to play some good honest British Atari. Hello you. Thanks ever so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to be first to see future Fact Hunt episodes. Click on the bell if you already are to make sure you're notified. And be sure to check out my other episodes. And if you want to be super awesome, check out my Patreon. But thanks again for watching, and I'll be seeing you next time. Ta-ra for now.